opened my eyes and saw my grandson Matthew standing by the bed. "Hello, Grandpa, Mom!" Grandpa opened their eyes. My wife and Matthew's mother jumped out of their chairs and joined Matthew. I'm sure I smiled, but it was hard to tell what was wrong with the drugs in my body. After all, why shouldn't I smile? I woke up and looked at several of my loved ones, which meant that I had beaten the odds, which after the operation were slightly less than 50-50. Whether the operation to remove the growth from my brain was successful, I will be able to answer as soon as the surgeon arrives later. But for now, higher powers have granted me the privilege of seeing my wife and family again. My beautiful wife smiled back at me. "Welcome back, Junior," she said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. The news spread quickly, and within 10 minutes, the room was crowded. My eldest daughter stood next to her mother. My son and twin daughters stood next to theirs. Everyone looked down at me, most with tears running down their cheeks. The hospital didn't usually allow that many people into the room, but probably made an exception because my sister-in-law, Matthew's mother, lived here. However, even her efforts did not help her two youngest grandchildren pass the nurse's station. I hope my recovery lasts long enough to at least hold these two girls in my arms one more time. That day, when everyone except my wife had left the room, the surgeon came in and told me the news. He thinks he has all the growth. Chemo and radiation will start soon. I will notice some changes in my cognitive, speech, and motor skills for a while, but therapy will help restore most of them. Overall, he was confident that the first obstacle was behind us. Of course, he didn't need to remind me that chemotherapy and radiation would be hard and would not guarantee long-term success. Very few people with these tumors have survived. The past 5 years, we've talked about it, all these surgeries and therapies and treatments are going to be expensive. And the likelihood of us still being together and watching Matthew's high school graduation in 4 years is less than 10%. So I have to ask myself, do you feel lucky? Damn right, that's what I do. How it started. It wasn't always this way. This is the feeling of luck. Of course, I raced motorcycles for 15 years without any serious injuries. This is very successful, I think. I had a decent childhood growing up near Chicago. I went through some difficult periods in my teens and early 20s. It probably has something to do with my discovery and poor choices involving drinking and bad women, which in a way explains Jane, my first wife. Have you ever heard the song Jackson performed by one of Frank Sinatra's daughters, Nancy, I think, and Cash? We were seized with a fever hotter than a pepper sprout. Well, that line pretty much describes my first marriage. I worked at night stocking shelves at the local grocery store and went to school during the day. The weekend was spent trying to make up for all the drinks I missed during the week. I was on my third beer when a girl I dated in high school walked in with Jane. Jane had a look that said she would gouge your eyes out and make you go blind with a smile. An ex-girlfriend came over to say hello and introduced me to Jane. Before I'd finished my fourth beer, Jane abandoned her friend and dragged me out into the parking lot. We once had sex in my car, which was hard to do in a Corvair. We then headed to my apartment, where she advised me to bring it back so we could do it again. At 3 o'clock in the morning, we woke up to start all over again. This was the beginning of the fever. I finally woke up around noon on Saturday to find Jane in the kitchen making coffee and eating a bowl of cereal. She was freshly showered and naked as the day she was born. I knew she had a beautiful face and a beautiful body, but when I saw her in daylight without a single piece of clothing, I knew she was world class. I took a cup of coffee and went to the shower. When I came out of the bathroom, Jane was undoing the bed. "These sheets need to be washed. Do you have a shirt and a pair of gym shorts I can wear?" How did I get so damn lucky that I slept with such a gorgeous woman like Jane? I found out much later, too late, that she came to her senses after her married lover left her when he received an ultimatum from his wife. I let my head think about me, and Jane became my wife. Years later, one of my good friends from that time asked me, "What were you thinking? You two had absolutely nothing in common." This was not true. Jane and I loved having sex. I should have paid more attention. In my defense, I was finishing my last year of school and working in a store. Jane worked in sales for an insurance company. Her salary was enough to cover most of our living. expenses, which allowed me to reduce the number of working days from 5 to 3 from Monday to Wednesday. We were still having sex like bunnies the other 4 days, so there was no reason for me to worry, or so I thought. One of the other movers asked to switch days for a long weekend. He asked me about it a week before, and I agreed immediately, forgetting about it. On Wednesday, I come to work and he looks at me as if to say, "What the hell?" And then I remember about the exchange. I call home, leave a message, I'll be home, and grab a bottle of wine and flowers. By 7 in the evening, I'm already home, but the apartment is empty. At 8:30, I open the wine. By 9, the bottle is empty. By 10, I'm lying on the couch in a dark room, sipping my second glass of Jack Daniels. At 10:15, the apartment door opens and Jane heads straight into the bedroom without noticing me and goes to the shower. While she was showering, I took a moment and grabbed her clothes from the bedroom floor. There was no doubt about the fresh smell of sex inside her panties. I was sitting on the bed, barely able to contain myself when Jane came out of the bathroom, drying her hair. When she saw me, she almost jumped back into the bathroom. "Damn it, GR, you scared me to death." Having finished the sentence, Jane stared at the panties that I was holding in my hand. She fell silent. "Today you sleep on the sofa. I've had too much to drink, and I'm afraid I might do or say something if we start talking about it now. 'Cause I'm sure we'll be screaming in a minute, and then who knows what. Just grab a t-shirt to sleep on or something and get out of our bedroom." Jane was still standing there. "Now," I shouted. I took the blanket off the bed and threw it into the living room. When Jane came out of the bedroom with a t-shirt in her hands, I closed the door. I actually fell asleep, probably from fatigue, but I woke up around 6. My head was spinning from alcohol and thoughts about what to do next. My pride told me to kick this bitch out and divorce her, but my pride will also suffer if we get divorced after just a year of marriage because she is unfaithful. I imagined grins behind me. Damn dilemma. By 7, I got up, went out to the sofa, and woke Jane. "Get up." Jane opened her eyes, which looked swollen. She was clearly crying. "So, who are you having sex with?" Jane was silent, for too long before answering. I saw her confusion, not knowing whether to lie or not. "Don't lie to me. If I find out that you're lying to me, it won't be pretty." Jane gave in. Henry Jacobs. "Are you sleeping with your boss?" "Yes." "What does his wife say?" Jane's eyes widened, the fear evident in the question. Did I intend to tell Henry's wife? "She doesn't know. Please don't tell her. He has children. Are you crazy? You too are having sex behind our backs, and you don't want his wife to find out. If he doesn't want his wife to know he's a cheater, he shouldn't have sex with other women." Apparently, somewhere in the logical space of Jane's brain, my words hit the target because she buried her face in her hands and began to sob. "Sorry, Jinar, sorry. Gather everything you need for a few weeks. Find a place to live for a while. At your sister's or Sally's, I don't care where, just get out of sight until I figure out what we should do next." Apparently, Jane didn't understand the full extent of my anger. Perhaps I was doing too good a job of remaining relatively calm and controlled, because what she said next could only have come from the mouth of a complete idiot. Why should I be the one who leaves? This is my apartment, no less than yours. I have never hit a woman, and thank God I did not choose that moment to act on my primal instincts. Jane will never know how close she came to being slapped in the face at that moment. "You know what, Jane? Stay here and I'll leave. But my first stop will be at your parents' house so I can give them your soiled panties and give them to your father. Imagine how proud he'll be of his little girl when I tell him you're having sex with your married boss." I don't think I could have shocked Jane more than with this statement. She knew her father knew how he would react if I carried out my threat. "You won't do this. You love my father. Why would you hurt him like that?" "Because you hurt me beyond measure. And I hate everything and everyone right now. Leave today, and we will leave the reason for our breakup between you and me. What about Mrs. Jacobs?" "Don't push your luck, Jane. I haven't decided what to do with Henry yet." I didn't tell Jane that I was going to let Henry be nervous for a while and then pin him down. Jane moved out and lived with her friend Sally. Sally was lonely, and I'm sure that in the 5 weeks we were apart, she introduced Jane back into the world of singles. The problem was that Jane had never really liked the single life. She fell for me and married me because, first of all, I think she loved me in her own selfish way. And secondly, she liked the feeling of security finally having a permanent man. It's just a shame she couldn't keep her legs together and not sleep with her boss. I admit that I love Jane, and I admit that I missed her when she was not at home, and I really miss sex. During these 5 weeks of separation, I started a couple of novels. All I can say is there's good sex, there's great sex, and then there's Jane in a league of her own. This raised another question that bothered me then and for many years after. Jane gave herself to Henry Jacobs, whom I did not consider at all handsome. I never told anyone about this, but the truth is that I probably wouldn't be so damn angry if Jane slept with, someone like Steve McQueen or Sean Canary. Instead, she gave her body to a guy I thought was downright ugly. What does this say about me? My pride took a double blow, which is why I spent our breakup trying to regain my sense of masculinity by having sex with others. Maybe Jane succumbed to all this power. He was her boss, after all. She could never explain this to me, and since she couldn't explain it properly, I remained on guard after our reconciliation, never fully trusting her. Yes, we have reconciled. I knew then, and I know now, at least half of women and most men think this is completely stupid. And other than one wonderful outcome, our daughter, I really was stupid. Here's how it happened. Jane showed up 5 weeks after our breakup and suggested we go to counseling together. She missed me and thought that if we tried again, we might succeed. My little brain let her in the door, and within an hour we were having sex on the couch, in the shower, and in the bed. I woke up the next morning with the sun shining through her blonde hair. She opened her big blue eyes and looked into mine. Then I realized that I still loved this woman despite all the pain she caused me. Can I take it back and try again? I set a few ground rules. She should quit her job at the insurance agency. There's no way I'm going to let her stay near Henry. Under no circumstances will I allow him to look me in the eyes knowing that he slept with my wife. By the way, I actually paid a visit to the Jacobs house after Jane quit. This fat, squat, inconspicuous woman like Matzah opened the door. She wouldn't let me in, so I stood on the porch and told her that her husband was having an affair with my wife. I was surprised by her reaction. Tell that easy girl, your wife, to stay away from my Henry. I've seen that slut the way she dresses. Do you call yourself a man? Do you allow your wife to leave the house like that? With these words, Mrs. Jacobs slammed the door in my face. I turned around and walked to my car, shaking my head and thinking to myself, well, this is not what I expected. We tried it, and for the next 7 years, everything went more or less normally. This helped when Jane became pregnant and gave birth to Christy. And yes, I tested paternity using the technology available at that time. I even rechecked a few years later when DNA testing became available. Christy is my biological daughter. Over these 7 years, I found my niche in the world of finance. After receiving my business degree, I started working at one of the large banks in the city center. Money was tight for a while, but with each promotion, money became more abundant. I felt like I was getting into my rhythm. Good job. Wonderful. Daughter. Enough money for basic needs and then some. The only thing missing was my marriage. Jane and I still had great sex. We ate many of our meals as a family and seemed to get along. But we both knew that deep down something was missing. It didn't help that we had very different interests. I spent several nights a week playing tennis at the club and on the weekends either golfing with co-workers or racing at the track in Indiana. Jane spent a couple of evenings a week in her 2 book clubs and attended various art events on the weekends. We also began to disagree on politics. I think I've always been a little conservative, was not an extremist like John Birch, but a bit of the teach a man to fish, and he can feed himself. Philosophy Jane, on the other hand, has become increasingly left-leaning, further away from the mainstream to lead Democrats. We dealt with our differences by not discussing politics in the House. We never raised our voices or got into heated discussions, but that was clearly the reason for the breakup. Everything came to an end one evening. I was in my office when Helen, my administrative assistant, walked in. Have you heard about Mr. Harrison? No, what about him? He died. He was walking down the sidewalk on his way to lunch with a client when a bucket fell on his head. A window washer dropped a bucket from a great height onto the Marshall Building, and it killed Mr. Harrison. Helen began to cry. Most loved our CEO. I stood up from the table and hugged Helen until she calmed down. She looked at me, looked confused, and then left the office and went to the women's room. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the news. It was so random. How could such a terrible incident kill such a wonderful person? Here's what got me searching. An hour ago, I was walking past the Marshall Building on my way back from a restaurant when I noticed Mr. Harrison and another man heading toward me. As we got closer, Mr. Harrison recognized me and smiled as he continued, walking and talking to the man. I felt satisfied that the CEO smiled at me. Perhaps in less than 2 minutes he died, passing under the place where I had just passed. This event helped me make a decision. That evening after dinner, I skipped tennis lessons and sat down to talk to Jane. Jane, last week I got a call from a headhunter. There's an opening for me at a bank in Spokane, Washington. This is a great position and more money. I decided to accept the offer. Jure, I don't want to move to Washington. Actually, I didn't ask you to move. This is probably the best time to stop this force. Jane looked relieved. What about Christy? I held my breath. I would like to get custody of Christy. Jane's reaction to my news made it clear that she was already considering separation. My parents will be angry if you go to Washington with their granddaughter. I think they'll be mad at me for letting this happen. I will try for you and your parents to see Christy as often as possible. We will arrange comfortable dates, holidays, summer, whatever. Tears began to flow down Jane's cheeks, and these tears brought my own. We sat at the kitchen table and held hands. Jane spoke first. Sorry we didn't work out. Dre, sorry. Me too, Jane. You know that I love you. You know I wanted everything to work out, but there is no way around the fact that we want more than the other gives. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just not there. I know you feel it too. This will hurt Christy. She will be glad to go with... She's Daddy's little girl, but she will miss her mother. The sadness was overwhelming, and I began to doubt my resolve. Do you want to try again? I haven't applied yet. We could try to do this. Jane looked at me and smiled. Damn it, Jure. That sounds so much like you. I know you would try. But do you really want to live like this for another 12 years until Christy graduates from high school and then still breaks her heart? Meanwhile, we are both missing out on what we know is out there. Jane and I talked for another hour. She admitted that she had recently considered leaving to join the Peace Corps, but was hesitant because of how it would affect Christy. Jane may not be a typical caring mother, but she loves her daughter in her own way and didn't know how to resolve the conflict she felt. My news settled it. I don't want to place too much blame on Jane for the failure of our marriage, but here's another thought that I've never shared with anyone, especially Jane, that her cheating all those years ago probably made it impossible for our marriage to succeed. There was always that little empty space in the relationship, a little mistrust, a little anger that never completely went away. Those women I slept with during our separation didn't help, because it's true. 2 wrongs don't make a right. I know there are couples who have overcome infidelity, but they probably had more in common than we did. And I'm willing to bet that such couples always feel that at least a small part of their love has been forever damaged. I also realized that if I ever got married again, I would want my wife to be my best friend. Christy took this news hard. I think it's good that Jane changed her mind about the Peace Corps. For the first 6 months after we moved to Spokane, I flew Christy back to Chicago once a month so she could visit her mom and grandparents. The first summer, she spent a week with each of them. During these weeks, I missed her and worked hard at my new position. Jane flew back to Spokane with Christy because Christy wanted to show her mom her new home and her bedroom. I reluctantly allowed Jane to bring Christy to Spokane, but the divorce would soon be final. And so far, Jane had placed no obstacles in the way of what was becoming an example of an amicable divorce. I prepared a guest room for Jane. She was going to stay with us for 2 days and 3 nights. After we sang Christy's Lullaby and she went to bed, Jane and I went into the living room to chat. It didn't take long before Jane got down to business. Do you have a girlfriend? Jane smiled as she asked the question. No, I was working too hard and paying too much attention to Christy. Being both parents at once is hard. Jane laughed. When was the last time you had sex? The night before our conversation in the kitchen. What, 6 months ago? Me too. Let's make love, Junior. In less than a minute we were both naked on my bed. Completely exhausted, I spoke to Jane for the first time since she said, "Let's make love 2 hours ago. I thought there would be a lot of fans around you. You still look 10 years younger and still a real beauty." Jane laughed. I got really scared, and it kept my legs crossed. Sally Reynolds is still single and still having fun. As a result, she developed some kind of incurable infection similar to herpes. This sounds terrible. Sally has to take medication to control her flare-ups. Just hearing about it was enough to make me scared and stay away from sex. I needed it. We both needed it. Jane and I made love again. We set the alarm for 6 in the morning so Jane could be back in bed before Christy woke up. Over the next 2 days, we tried to keep a low profile around Christy so as not to confuse her. No hugs or kisses in front of her. But once she fell asleep for the night, Jane and I were back in business. When the alarm clock rang at 6 in the morning on the last day of Jane's visit, we made love once more. This was the last time. With Jane's return to Chicago, it became clear how much I was missing the emotional and physical aspects of the relationship. For the first time since moving to Spokane, I looked around. There were many beautiful women working at the bank and few restrictions on dating or marriage between employees. The rules prohibited dating or marrying those who worked in the same branch or department. One partner could not have any power over the other, regardless of the number of levels between. The bank recognized that in today's environment, many relationships begin in the workplace simply because that's where people spend most of their waking time. Therefore, the bank tried to meet halfway. When 2 employees began dating, one of them was transferred. The policy seemed to be working. That is why there were no problems when I began to develop an interest in one of the branch cashiers. Caitlin was a beautiful 24-year-old girl whose personality could light up a room with her mere presence. She had a sensitivity to others that I particularly liked. She loved children, dogs, her family, and Jesus, although not necessarily in that order. We dated for a few weeks. When I was scheduled to race that weekend in Portland, Caitlin asked if she could come with me. She surprised me when she said we could share a room, but asked for 2 beds. I left Christy with her nanny, Mrs. Hanson, and picked Caitlin from her apartment. Caitlin spent a few minutes examining my motorcycle, which was mounted on the bed of a pickup truck. I held the door open when she got into the booth. She caught my eye on her long, tanned legs and blushed. Caitlin was wearing a beautiful strapless dress that clearly didn't allow her to wear a bra. The trip to Portland was calm and fun. Caitlin spent the first half hour asking questions about my bike. She never rode one because her parents were completely against motorcycles. When I convinced her that not all bikers belong to criminal motorcycle clubs, she relaxed a little. She admitted that she had hidden our true destination from her parents. Told them we were going to Portland, but didn't mention we were attending a motorcycle race. Friday evening at the hotel passed chastely. A little kissing, but nothing more. We both slept in our pajamas in our beds. We spent Saturday at the track. I did well, finishing 3rd and making the podium. Unfortunately, the race was marred by a serious accident. Kevin Sawyer and Ted Colton were hit hard when Ted went off a corner. Both were taken to the hospital, and from what I've heard, Ted will probably never be able to race again. This incident greatly affected Caitlin. On the way home on Sunday, she asked how I could take such a risk. It's difficult to explain why. Dangerous activities attract some people. Hobbies such as motorcycle racing, skydiving, or rock climbing are important to the individual participant. I think it's in their DNA. Some people need thrills. Others are terrified of any danger. Caitlin belonged to the second category. I found out just how much when I called her on Tuesday to ask her out on a new date. Caitlin refused. She said that she was falling in love with me, but could not afford to be with a man who took such risks. I wasn't ready to give up racing, nor was I ready to spend my life with someone who was afraid of my lifestyle. This was the beginning of our relationship, and it was best to end it before we went too far. It's a shame. She really was a very nice woman. I was playing in a mixed doubles tennis tournament when I noticed a beautiful blonde in the stands. She watched the match and smiled. I tried not to look, but I couldn't, causing me to miss the next pitch. Damn it, Jor. Get your Act together. Tess Young, my tennis partner, is the most competitive person I've ever met. She's 5'10" and built like Elle Macpherson, only with arms like Linda Hamilton. She attracts the attention of every man she meets and laughs on her way to the bed she shares with her girlfriend. Did I mention that Tess likes girls? Sorry, Tess. Tess looked up into the stands and gave me one of those "I know what you're looking at" smiles. Tess took the next serve between our two opponents. I concentrated and was able to intercept their serve, which allowed us to win the set. I looked back up into the stands and saw the same tall blonde woman stand up and applaud. We won the second set and the match. After shaking hands with her opponents at the net, Tess whispered in my ear, "Would you like me to introduce you?" I looked at Tess and she immediately read my thoughts. We work together and she wants to join the club. I invited her to show her around. "Let's go, I'll introduce you." Tess knew my situation. I had been divorced for almost a year. While I wasn't some kind of woman hunter trying to sleep with everyone I met, I dated a few other women after Catalan, but nothing clicked. Many of them were intimidated by the prospect of becoming an instant mother to my 6-year-old daughter. One of them even suggested sending Christy back to her mother so we could have time to get to know each other better. My answer? No thanks. You just told me everything I need to know about you. So I was more than willing to let Tess introduce me to this beautiful woman with a smile that lit up the entire court. "Denise, this is Joar, my tennis partner, and just a good guy. Joar, this is my colleague and good friend Denise. I tried to control myself. Tess said that you were thinking about joining the club. Do you like tennis?" Yes, it was a stupid question, but that's all I could come up with at that moment. And it was better than the first thought that was spinning in my head. I almost said, "You are beautiful, marry me." Denise missed the triviality of my question. Yes, I love tennis. I played on the university team. Well, that explained the great legs and athletic build. "Since you are thinking of joining the club, would you like to be my guest tomorrow and play a match? Maybe I can convince you to join." Denise agreed to meet the next day, and I came up with an excuse to leave her with Tess before I could stop being stupid. Later that evening, I called Tess and found out a little about Denise. Tess told me that Denise was in limbo in her marriage. Her husband abandoned her and their 4-year-old son 8 months ago. Denise filed for divorce and asked the church to annul the marriage. The divorce procedure could take several more months since his guilt had to be proven. She's a very good woman, a little conservative when it comes to marriage, man, and sex. I never heard her say a bad word about anyone, not even about the scoundrel who abandoned her. She was very depressed when he left, claims he doesn't know why he left. We have lunch together in the office, and I really like her. Since he left, she hasn't gone out with anyone. I thought you were the perfect person to help her come out of her shell. Start with tennis, and then maybe take her out to dinner. I saw your look. You think she's cute." The next day, Denise and I met and played tennis. She beat me to smithereens. I struggled to keep up and somehow won the second set. Then she started playing seriously and beat me 6-2 in the third set. The short tennis skirt and sleeveless tank top didn't help me concentrate. Indeed, it was a pleasure to watch her movements around the court. She was kind enough to agree to a rematch soon. The following week, we chatted for a few minutes immediately after the match before Denise excused herself and went to collect her son from the babysitter. Right before she turned to leave, I invited her to dinner that weekend. Denise smiled and agreed. Dinner was great. Denise and I exchanged stories about life and the current state of affairs, especially the difficulties of raising a child alone. We went on a few more dates after that dinner, and I finally decided to introduce Christy to Denise and her son, Mike. The children got along great, Christy liked Denise, so the romance continued to develop. By this point, I had already fallen in love with Denise and was pretty sure she felt the same about me. We approached the physical side of our relationship slowly for the first 2 months, when Denise unexpectedly suggested spending the night, incurred a lien. We found babysitters for the kids, and so I found myself in a hotel room overlooking the lake as the moon rose above the horizon. But the real beauty stood in front of me, with the moonlight behind it. The light filtered through the sheer nightie Denise was wearing. I hugged her and kissed her. Denise asked me to close the curtains, even though we were on the low 10th floor, and there was no way anyone could see us. All the lights were turned off, and the room was almost pitch black. Surprisingly, this was probably the first time I made love to a woman, in the dark, and it was erotic in its own way. I focused on my senses of smell and touch like never before. I took off Denise's nightie, kissing her. We separated briefly so I could pull back the covers and lay her down on the bed. This is why having no light in the room was an advantage. When Denise reached for the top blanket to cover herself, it was easy to convince her that it was not necessary. Since I didn't see it, the coating was unnecessary. We had sex slowly and gently. After that, we lay next to each other, catching our breath. Denise put her hand on the back of my head as I kissed her neck. We fell asleep in this position. When I opened my eyes in the morning, there was enough light in the room to see again. Denise was still sleeping. The covers were over us, and I could not resist lifting them. I laughed quietly as I looked at Denise. At some point during the night, she got up and put on her nightgown. The nightgown was thrown over the chair. I laughed because it was clear to me that I would have to get used to this level of modesty. Jane and I always slept naked unless it was freezing outside. Even then, we usually just turned the electric blanket on full. My physical relationship with Denise was very discreet, but very loving. We kept them a secret from her parents, because in their eyes, Denise was still married, and they considered any physical relationship to be adultery. No wonder they didn't like me. So it was not surprising how they reacted when her husband returned to town a month later. Both her parents and her relatives were very happy about the return of Dylan, the prodigal husband. All for pressured Denise to stop the divorce proceedings and tried to save the marriage. I stopped by her parents' house to talk some sense into her parents and was met at the door by her mother. You could freeze hell over the look I got from Denise's mother when I asked why they wanted the couple to make up. Did they even know where the bastard was or what he was doing? Didn't they want to find out before they pitted Denise against him again? It's none of your business. And I'd appreciate it if you left Denise alone from now on. She slammed the door. I was hoping to see Denise alone and haven't been able to go to her house since Dylan returned. My biggest hope is next weekend when we get to play in a tennis tournament. I shouldn't have been surprised to learn through the club schedule that Denise had resigned from her club membership. Finally, Tess stood up for me and convinced Denise to call me. Tess told me that Denise gave her 2 weeks' notice for the job. Denise called me that day. She apologized for the way she ended our relationship, telling me that she had been avoiding calling me because she didn't know how to explain what was going on. She felt she owed it to her marriage and their son. She will do everything she can to forgive Dylan and save their marriage. Denise, I think you are making a huge mistake, but I'm going to respect your wishes and leave you alone. You know we love each other, and you know we were meant to be best friends. I heard Denise sob and whisper, "I know, GR, and I love you." Before she hung up, I was a walking zombie for at least the first week after Denise called. Even worse was Christy's reaction when I told her that we would likely never see Denise and Mike again. "But Daddy, you told me you loved Denise and you thought she loved you. You seemed so happy when you were together. Why can't you bring her back?" I didn't have an answer. All I could do was hold Christy until she fell asleep in my arms. 3 weeks later, I left my favorite drinking establishment across from the office. I was standing on the street, breathing in the fresh air when a strange man approached me. "Hey, aren't you Jura Douglas?" I looked at the guy, wondering if I knew him, when he slammed his right fist straight into my stomach. It knocked the wind out of me, and before I could catch my breath, he threw a sharp left hand and broke my nose. I fell to my knees and hit my ribs with my foot. I blocked the next blow with my arms crossed, trying to get to my feet and fight back when the bar door opened. 2 guys I know saw what was happening and started screaming. My attacker ran away. I fainted. I ended up in the emergency room, broken nose, 3 broken ribs, mild concussion. I spent the night in the hospital due to a concussion. I was surprised when I woke up to find Tess standing next to the bed, holding Christy's hand. Christy held mine. "Good morning, Junior. Daddy, Christy wanted to hug me, but Tess held her back." She leaned over and whispered in Christy's ear about broken ribs. Hey, baby. Then I looked at Tess. Why are you here? Tess and I were tennis partners, but I couldn't imagine she'd get a call if I was injured. I'm here because I saw Christy in the waiting room. She was there with Mrs. Hanson. I sent Mrs. Hanson home. She was dead tired. I told her I would keep Christy with me until you were released. The doctor said you can go home this morning if there are no complications. First of all, this doesn't explain why you're in the hospital in the first place. I brought Denise and Mike to the emergency room last night. We'll talk about this later. Tess pointed at Christy with her eyes. I got the hint, but he really wanted to know why both Denise and Mike were in emergency situations. I thought it wouldn't be too serious if Tess brought them instead of the ambulance. Tess understood my concern and leaned close to my ear. They're okay. Her parents took them. I'll let you know later. The doctor and nurse entered. I noticed how great the nurse was as she pulled the Roman 4 out of my arm. I looked. Her name tag said Wendy. She smiled when she caught my eye. The doctor cleared me to go home, and within an hour, I was wheeled out the door and into Tess' car to take me home. The police came to see you last night while you were sleeping. They gave me their cards and asked if you would call them this morning. We pulled into the driveway, and Tess carried Christy into the house. She was already fast to sleep. I showed Tess Christy's room, and Tess sat her down on the bed. I covered the baby with a light blanket. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I finally heard about the chaos that had happened last night. Last night, Denise's husband was furious. He knew you two were dating, but until yesterday, he never knew about sex. Little Mike said something that made him angry. He beat Denise until she admitted that you two slept together. Then he left looking for you. After he was done with you, he came back and hit Denise a couple more times. Denise called me, and I took her to the emergency room. You should have heard that she was so worried about you. Tess stood up and poured the brewed coffee. I sat and thought, wait, if Denise's husband only heard about the sex last night, how did he find me so quickly? I don't know. Maybe he was already after you. We'll know more when the police pick up this asshole. They have an officer stationed in front of Denise's house, and they have a comprehensive bulletin on him. How are Denise and Mike? Denise has a swollen lip and a black eye. I called her at parents' house, and her mom hung up. She said something about a gay girl before hanging up. I don't think any of us will be able to reach Denise while she's staying with her parents. The police arrived later that morning. 2 detectives took my statement and asked if I was ready to press charges. Their attitude towards me was cold at first, but it changed during our conversation. At first, they treated me like some kind of pervert who seduced and dragged a married woman into bed, and then they got what they deserved. After I explained my refusal, our long courtship, and my intention to marry Denise when the divorce was finalized, they treated me differently. After that first morning, things got even sillier. After police caught and detained Dylan, it was discovered that there was an outstanding warrant for his arrest in Montana. Apparently, the reason he dumped Denise was because a waitress in Whitehorse got pregnant while he was out fishing with his buddies. When she threatened to arrest him, if he didn't come back and marry her, he went to Montana, convinced her to have an abortion, and then spent the remaining months being such an asshole that she eventually kicked him out and sent him packing back to his wife. When the young girl's parents found out the whole story, they called the police, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Unfortunately, it didn't make much of a difference, and Whitehorse police never took any action until Dylan was arrested in Spokane. Dylan eventually spent 6 years in a Washington state prison for 3 attacks before being extradited to Montana, where he spent several more years as a guest in their prison system. Dylan never returned home. Given his violent tendencies, I kept an eye on him, in case he decided to come after me again. I was lucky when he got into trouble in prison in Montana and was stabbed to death. After Dylan was arrested for assaulting Denise, Mike and I thought about getting back together with Denise, but it never happened. She quickly returned to her previous lifestyle, living with her parents. They spared no effort to convince Denise that she had sinned by sleeping with me while she was married, that she was under my influence and under the spell of a godless girl who was into girls. Her mother did not even allow me to have a telephone conversation with her. When I approached Denise outside her house the next day, she refused to talk to me. Dylan's parents also blamed Denise for Dylan having such a criminal temper tantrum, claimed it was her fault because she was an adulteress, completely ignoring the 11 months Dylan spent with the girl in Montana. Both parents convinced Denise not to have the marriage annulled, arguing that in God's eyes, Mike would be illegitimate if the marriage was annulled. I talked to a Catholic priest about it, and he said it was complete nonsense. But Denise chose to believe her parents. Years later, I saw Denise at a college tennis match between Christy and Mike's teams. Denise smiled at me, but her smile no longer had the same light. Christy spent some time after the match with Mike, and they talked and reminisced about how close they were to becoming half-brother and sister. Mike told Christy that Denise never divorced his father, even during his 7-year stint in 2 prisons. None of them visited him during these years. Denise became a widow when Dylan died, and then married the man who sat next to her in the stands. A former priest, oddly enough. Are we making our own luck? 5 or 6 weeks after Dylan attacked me outside the bar, I was almost completely recovered. Christy and I were walking through Riverfront Park in downtown Spokane when I noticed a beautiful woman running towards us along the path. She looked at us with recognition, smiled, but did not slow down. It took me half a minute to realize it was Wendy, the nurse who removed my Roman 4. This thought was immediately replaced by another. Damn, it's a pity that she didn't stop to say hello. Christy and I continued to the playground, and I wondered if my love life would ever be restored. I was pushing Christy on the Gillock swing mentally 500,000 miles away when a voice behind me simply said hello. I turned around and saw Wendy standing there. My mind went blank until I got hit by the swing seat on a reverse swing. Christy screamed, "Daddy," and almost fell out of the seat. I managed to pick up Christy. Wendy asked, "Is she okay?" I nodded before Wendy started laughing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I think the last thing you need is another concussion. How are you feeling?" Wendy grabbed my face with one hand and turned it sideways to inspect my nose. "It looks like it's healing." I took this moment to look into her eyes. It's hard to explain and seems counterintuitive, but that day it was as if a higher power flipped the switch from a little unlucky to very lucky. Over the next 3 decades, everything simply worked out in my favor. At least until that day in the doctor's office, when we looked at the CT scan of my brain. That's how we became a couple. I held Christy in my arms and Wendy held my chin, giving me her medical opinion on how my nose was healing. I asked, "Would you like to have dinner with me? Any night you're not free." Wendy's eyes moved from my nose to my eyes. "What about that woman who took care of you in the hospital? Won't she be upset or jealous? Tess is just a good friend and my doubles tennis partner. We are not in a relationship. I thought maybe she would want to change that status, judging by the way she was acting." I smiled. That would really upset her friend. "Tess is into girls." A girl with big ears in my arms interrupted. "Dad, who is the girl who is into other girls?" Wendy gave me an amused look, as if she was saying, "Well, how do you answer this question, Dad?" I chickened out. "Baby, can I talk to Wendy for a minute? I'll answer your question later." I turned to Wendy. "Now that we've established that I'm not in a relationship, can you answer my original question before we get sidetracked again? Can I treat you to dinner this week?" We had dinner followed by more dates. We found common ground on many levels. Wendy did not play tennis, but was an avid golfer. So I spent more time on the golf courses and less time on the tennis courts. Tess grumbled a little, although it was clear that she was happy for me. I hadn't officially introduced Wendy as my girlfriend to Christy for months. The poor kid was still recovering from the loss of Denise and Mike. The timing helped. Within a week of our first date, Christy was scheduled to spend 2 months with her mother and grandparents during the summer holidays. I had my reasons for slowly building my relationship with Wendy. More than one annoying friend has asked whether our romance is a rebound. I've heard it enough times that it turns out Wendy's friends and coworkers have mentioned it too. We just decided to go slow and calm. I realized something soon after we started dating. I realized how similar Denise and Jane were in appearance. Both were blondes with blue eyes. They both had a wide open friendly smile that immediately attracted me. Both were about 5 feet 9 inches tall and had large breasts. How could I not have noticed this before? The similarities became even more obvious when I compared the two to Wendy. Wendy is a 5'5" brunette with brown eyes. She has a thin waist, which gives the illusion of larger hips than she actually has. Her small breasts are perfect for her slim body. I was pleased with the differences, and here's why. I have a friend, David, who, after divorcing his first wife, Betty, dates and ends up marrying a woman named Becky, who looked almost exactly like Betty. People were too polite to say anything, but I watched them at social events when David introduced Becky to someone who knew his first wife. You could see the confusion on people's faces like, is this a joke before they realized they weren't? Poor Becky. People called her Betty all the time. David and Becky eventually divorced. It turned out that Betty and Becky also had similar personalities. The same problems that destroyed the first marriage also destroyed the second. I don't know if some part of my brain was trying to recreate my first marriage when I decided Denise was the one. They certainly had different views on sex, but was I deceiving myself about physical attraction? I guess I'll never know. I spoke with Christy almost every other day during the 2 months she spent with her mother and grandparents. Jane was dating her high school volleyball coach, and Christy was getting great lessons from him. I silently hoped that this wouldn't push her away from tennis. I needn't have worried. Christy ended up earning high school honors in both tennis and volleyball, and choosing a college that offered her a good tennis scholarship. Another reason for the slow development of our romance was Wendy's work schedule. She had no seniority at the hospital and worked the night shift. Night shifts can take a serious toll on relationships. Besides the physical differences, there was another big difference between Wendy and my two previous loves. Both Jane and Denise were happy to follow my decisions regarding how we spent our time together. I loved going to the movies or rock concerts and going to good steak restaurants for dinner. And that's how my dates with Jane and Denise usually went. With Wendy, it was different. She gladly went with me to the cinema or to a rock concert, but on the next date, she chose the activity herself. I couldn't complain, because when the choice was hers, she paid herself, and I found myself enjoying live theater dancing, to country music, and oh my god, even sushi. The biggest surprise for me was how much I loved hiking. As a city boy from the Midwest, the closest I came to nature was swatting mosquitoes on some lake in Wisconsin when we visited Lake Geneva on the 4th of July. Wendy took me to Ray and bought me a pair of hiking boots and 3 pairs of wool socks. The very next weekend, we went hiking to Hot Springs in Idaho. We had only been dating for 2 months and had yet to be physically intimate. So I was stunned when we entered the clearing where the hot springs were located. There were probably 8 or 9 other people there, mostly in their 20s and 30s, and half of them were women, and none of them had a scrap of clothing on. Wendy threw off her backpack and simply took off all her clothes. This was the first time I saw her naked. She jumped into one of the pools and called to me, "Come on, War. It's great here." I threw off my backpack and took off all my clothes except my underwear and sat in the pool next to Wendy. The girl sitting across from me chose that exact moment to stand up and sit cross-legged on the edge. Seriously, I looked at Wendy. She had a stupid grin on her face. I whispered, "You could have warned me." "What?" "And missed the look on your face?" "Very funny. Now that you're in the water, take off those wet pants and let them dry." I took off my pants and half rising, tried to throw them onto my equipment. I've been coming here for years, ever since my college boyfriend brought me here. Newbies usually get used to it after a while. You'll see after half an hour you'll get used to it. I don't know about this. First of all, this is the first time I've seen you naked and you have an incredible body. Second of all, I'm sorry for saying this, but I can't help but notice the woman in front of me, which shows off her private area. Do you like it? I stopped to ask myself before answering Wendy's question. Is this some kind of catch? Like, are these pants making me look fat? Well, I thought it's better to tell the truth. So I answered, on the one hand, it's quite erotic. On the other, it looks a little childish, which can be perverted. Wendy laughed. I like the way you think, Jor. This could be the start of a long relationship. Maybe I'll shave there too when we get back to civilization. Now you're just teasing me and you've gone too far. 20 minutes ago I hadn't seen you naked, and now you promise that you'll let me kiss you. in the most intimate place on your beautiful body. If you continue like this, I'll never be able to get out of this pool." In the end, I was able to walk out without being embarrassed. Wendy and I walked another half mile and found a nice spot to camp at the edge of a cliff with a nice view of the valley below. Since it was my first night in the forest, I followed all of Wendy's instructions. We ate frozen food, which was surprisingly tasty, probably because I was so hungry. Wendy pulled our sleeping bags out of the tent and laid them on the ground as it began to get dark. "Are we going to sleep inside the tent?" "Yes, but that's later," Wendy replied, taking off her clothes. "Take off your clothes." Like I said, I was new to outdoor camping, so I followed her instructions. Wendy sat me down, then sat on my lap facing me. "I've wanted to make love to you for weeks, but I know you needed time. And I wanted our first time to be special, something you've never experienced before. Something we'll treasure in my hearts forever. I love you, Junior. Make love to me, Junior." We kissed, our tongues sliding against each other. Wendy broke the kiss. Damn, I wanted this so much. I was amazed. How did she guess? Of all the wonderful positions for making love to a woman, this was my favorite. We calmed down, breathing returned to normal. Wendy was still sitting on my lap. I didn't ask. "I hope it's okay that I didn't." "Stop," Wendy said. "I started taking the pills after our second date. I knew it would happen." Wendy crawled off my lap and laid down on the sleeping bag. It was a moonless night. The sky became darker every hour and the stars became brighter. I have never seen so many stars in my life. Wendy showed me the Milky Way, and that was the first time I saw it. Wendy pressed her head against my shoulder, pointing at the satellites as they flew past, and we saw 2 shooting stars. An hour later, I heard her light breathing. She fell asleep, clinging to me. I held on as long as I could, but after a while I had to move my hand or risk losing it. I woke Wendy up with a kiss. We took our sleeping bags and went to the tent to sleep. The next morning we rose at first light, Wendy, made coffee and some freeze-dried eggs. Another first for me was swimming in a stream. Wendy was kind. She didn't laugh when I climbed out of the icy stream. My manhood was struggling to be pulled into my body. I looked at her and shouted, "Zone decrease." We broke camp and headed back to the trailhead. Along the way, we discussed our relationship and promised each other to be faithful, no dating, sex, etc. With others, I think we both felt good about this agreement. That's why it was such a surprise 3 months later, 3 wonderful months later, when I received the package in the mail. Inside was a typewritten note and a computer disk. The note said, "Look what your girlfriend is doing." I inserted the disk into the computer and looked in horror. On the screen was the woman I was going to marry in a few weeks having sex with another man. I couldn't tell who the man was because of the way the video was edited. But there was no doubt it was Wendy. The filming was done with a stationary camera, and there were at least 5 different scenes. I didn't watch all 5 or even watch all the scenes in their entirety. I watched enough to know that Wendy was not forced and that she clearly enjoyed the sex. I turned off the computer, made myself a stiff drink, and sat down, trying to formulate a plan. For 3 months after our hike, Wendy gave me every reason to believe that she was honoring our agreement. A woman couldn't show more affection or happiness than she showed whenever we were together. This made her betrayal in the video even harder to understand. Could the woman I loved be so treacherous? Unfortunately, given my past experiences, the answer might have been yes. That evening, Wendy was going to come over for dinner with Christy and me. When Wendy arrived, I did everything I could to stay calm, including limiting myself to 1 bottle of beer with dinner. Christy left to watch a movie, giving Wendy and I time to talk. Alone. "Wendy, I want to show you something." We went to my home office. Wendy sat at my desk while I turned on the computer. I started the video. "I'll be right back." I left the room, closing the door behind me, not wanting to see those scenes again. I returned 10 minutes later. The computer was turned off and Wendy sat hunched over, covering her tear-stained face with her hands. I was the first to speak. I thought we had an agreement. Wendy looked up at me. There was horror in her eyes. "We have it. And I didn't break it. These videos were taken a long time ago, before we started dating. Wendy, you know my story with Christy's mom. As much as I want to believe you, I would feel like the biggest fool if I was cuckolded at a second time. Is there a way to prove that the videos are old? Who is this man, by the way? This is Dr. James Andrews, and no, I don't know how to prove to you that these movies were made last year. James and I dated for almost 5 months before I found out he was sleeping with at least 2 other nurses. I, of course, didn't know that he was filming us. These films were shot in his bedroom. He was clearly hiding the camera from me. Why did he send them to me? I don't understand. James was unhappy when I left him. He promised to break up with others if I forgave him. I told him to go, to hell. Last month he came to me and asked if I would give him another chance. I refused. I said that I found a real man who understands what love and loyalty are. He didn't say anything. I thought he understood. Christy chose that moment to knock on the door and enter the room. I was confused. Like this again. Christy was beginning to forget about Denise and was already accepting Wendy into our lives. How could I be so damn stupid? I was sitting in my chair when Christy climbed onto my lap and innocently asked Wendy to tell her a bedtime story or sing a song. Wendy held back her tears, long enough to tell Christy that she needed to leave immediately. Christy didn't see Wendy's eyes fill with tears before they started flowing again. Wendy shouted goodbye before we heard the front door close. I sat and thought about what I should do. I didn't have the slightest idea. How could Wendy prove to me that these videos were taken last year? Can I trust her if I can't prove it? And finally, how the hell do I stop seeing the woman I loved with another man? Even if the videos are old, the few minutes I saw her with him will be hard to forget. I told Christy to brush her teeth and promised to come over to put her to bed. Christy may only be 8 years old, but she wasn't ignorant. Dad, why was Wendy so sad when she left? I was ready for her. Question. I never lied to my little girl, but that didn't mean she had to know every detail. Wendy heard some bad news about someone she works with at the hospital, and it really upset her. Maybe we'll know more soon. I hope she's okay, Dad. I like her. I like her too. We'll keep our fingers crossed that everything will be okay. I tucked my daughter in before walking into the kitchen and pouring myself 3 fingers of good bourbon. The next 2 days were probably the longest days of my life. Nothing came to my mind to ease my anxiety. On Friday evening, the phone rang. Gior, can I come over tonight? I thought you were working tonight. I took the night on my own. We need to figure this out, and I don't want to wait. Are you free tonight? Yes, of course. Have you had dinner? No, but don't worry about it. I just need to talk to you. My heart was pounding. Come now. Wendy was at the house in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even give her a chance to ring the doorbell. As soon as I heard her car in the driveway, I opened the front door. As soon as Wendy entered the house, Christy ran into her arms. Wendy, you're back. Wendy looked at me. Her gaze was questioning. Was there something deeper in Christy's greeting? Did I tell Christy that it was over between us? I shook my head at Wendy's silent question. Christy was worried when you left so suddenly last time. I told her that you heard bad news about a coworker. She missed you the last 2 days. Wendy looked relieved. Christy, can I talk to your dad for a few minutes about grown-up things? I'll come to you as soon as we're done. I promise. Christy didn't really like being expelled, but she obeyed. As soon as she left, Wendy headed towards the office and closed the door as I followed. You are the only way I could figure out how to prove to you that I didn't cheat, was if you heard it straight from James' mouth. I pinned him in the hospital this morning. That fool didn't even think about it. I'm recording the conversation, and he didn't know that one of the head nurses was in earshot when I pinned him down. I want you to listen to this. Wendy took out the recorder and pressed play. Q. James, you showed me those movies. You should have sent them to him. D. Oh, damn, really? Did he show them to you? Yes, oh, damn, really? Why did you send them to him? D. I was hoping this guy would get mad and just break up with you. I thought some dim-witted banker would lose his temper and never speak to you again. I was in the nurse's station when you told Glenda that you had a guy who had trust issues because his first wife cheated on him. So I sent those videos thinking if you got dumped you and I could get back together. How did I know your boyfriend would be smart enough to ask about this instead of just leaving you? Q. Bastard. Did you think I would run to you after that? D. It was worth the try. You weren't supposed to know about the videos or that I sent them to him. 9 out of 10 guys would just dump you without asking your side. Q. Glenda, did you write everything down? Gee, yes, I wrote it down. You set me up, you fucking bitch. You have no idea. Wendy turned off the recorder and looked at me. What now, Junior? I hugged Wendy tightly, trying not to hurt her. We have a lot to discuss, but first, what are you going to do with this? Doctor? Well, that's a problem. If I tell the administration about this, most likely a lot of people will watch these films. I'm not happy about that prospect. Do you understand? I understood her reluctance, but she needed to know that I fully supported her and that there were more important issues. That's the real problem, isn't it? Every time one of these perverts does something to a woman, the victim becomes a victim again when she signs a complaint. The system turns everything against the woman. Her sex life becomes a subject of public discussion. The accused lawyer is given the right to defend the client, and as a result, the victim is turned into a criminal. And that's if the case even goes to court. Too often a man is rich, influential, or has some special talent. Society, his colleagues, or bosses are ready to forgive him because of his talent, be it a CEO, a sports hero, doctor, priest, or pastor. But here's the question for you. If you let this Dr. Andrews get away with it, I guarantee that in a year or two, maybe less, he'll be doing the same thing again with another nurse or patient. Wendy listened to my tirade, and I realized that she needed more time to think about everything. We both knew that going to the administration could end her career at the hospital. They'll try to pin it all on me. Dr. Andrews is very popular at the hospital. Almost everyone will think I was lucky to be in his bed and won't care that he filmed it. Okay, you don't have to make a decision today. We have a little girl waiting for us to finish our adult conversation tonight. Let's take her to Baskin & Robbins for ice cream. We have the weekend and we have a lot to do. Discuss. The three of us went out for ice cream, which delighted Christy. I admit it was wonderful to be together again. Wendy stayed the night, but we didn't have sex that night. I could see that Wendy was disappointed, but we needed to talk things through first before moving forward. The next morning, Wendy didn't waste any time. After breakfast, we sat down with coffee in my backyard. Jor, you're having a hard time after watching these videos, right? Yes, I knew you had men before me, but I didn't need to see you with them. It made it all too real. I understand that, Jor, but I want you to realize something. I had sex with a dozen men before I met you, but I never made love to any of them. You were the first man I gave my heart and soul to. You, on the other hand, gave your heart and soul to two women before me. One you married, the other was going to. Think about it from my point of view, from a woman's point of view. You think it was easier for me to cope. With this fact, Wendy made a good, great argument. I didn't know how to answer a question. And think about it, Jor. I've seen both of these women. They both have bigger breasts, much bigger than mine, Wendy said with a small smile, showing that she was trying not to make the conversation too heavy. I'm not a fool. I stroked one breast through her shirt and kissed her. Yours are perfect. Of course she kissed me back. I'm serious about our relationship, Jor, but I have a few conditions before we go any further. Oh no, I thought. First of all, we're having kids. I want at least 2, maybe 3. Can you handle having 3 or 4 kids running around the house? I would even love it. But will you still love Christy like a daughter, even after you have children of your own? I already love Christy, and that won't change. I will give her all the love Jane will allow. I won't try to take Jane's place in Christy's heart. I understand what's the next condition. The second condition is that you must stop racing. I can't stand it when you go to the track. Can you do that for me? Damn, Wendy asked for a lot. Honda just released their NT650 Hawk, and I was already thinking about buying one. It was a beautiful cafe racer, completely stripped down, almost naked. The thing is, I was already thinking about quitting track. The younger guys were starting to overtake me, and I had to work too hard to keep up. Last year, I crashed twice. Not seriously, but still. Can I keep the Harley? I knew this would be a difficult moment for Wendy. In the medical community, we bikers were called future donors. If you promise to be careful, I decided this was the chance I'd been waiting for. Okay, I'll give up racing. Keep the cruiser, and you promise to ride in the back seat with me sometimes. Wendy surprised me again. You buy me a helmet and all the equipment, and I will go with you. But remember, you promised to be careful. Great, I almost screamed. What's the next condition? The last condition is that you promise to love me. for the rest of your life so that we grow old together. I'm not asking you to be faithful because I know you don't have to ask. You will be faithful as long as we are together. I promise the same. Agreed. Shall we seal this with a handshake, or are you crazy? We'll seal this with a kiss. Wendy jumped into my lap, hugged me, and gave me a passionate kiss. Wendy, did you just propose to me? Yes, Mr. Douglas, I did, and in case you didn't notice, you accepted it. I'll talk to Christy later today. I'm sure she'll be delighted, but I think she and I need to talk about this alone. Also, you and I need to finish talking about what to do about Dr. Andrews, okay? The mention of Andrews brought a frown to Wendy's face. I realized that we need to return to the happier topics of this morning. Listen, since you proposed to me, do I get a ring? Wendy slapped me on the chest. No, stupid. I've already chosen the ring you'll buy me at Ben Bridge. I'll show it to you tomorrow. An hour later, Wendy left to pick up some things from her apartment. I took a moment to talk to Christy. As expected, she was delighted. I even suggested that she have a brother or sisters, and she was even more excited about the possibility. On Saturday evening, Wendy and I discussed a difficult topic about the doctor. She agreed with me that she couldn't just turn a blind eye to it. Together, we came up with a plan. On Sunday, the three of us went shopping. Christy had been asking for her ears to be pierced for a long time, and this was the perfect time to make her wish come true. Wendy showed a ring she liked. It was a beautiful half-carat solitaire. It was Wendy's style to choose something understated. I told Wendy and Christy to pick out earrings for Christy while I talked to the salesperson. I told him to replace the half-carat diamond with a full carat that was lying nearby. He smiled and whispered, "She will be delighted. It will be ready tomorrow afternoon." Christy had her ears pierced and given beautiful sapphire earrings. Wendy was delighted with the ring when I gave it to her on Monday evening. She looked at it for a while, before realizing that the diamond was larger than the one she had chosen. I was rewarded with hugs and kisses and tears. The following weekend, we got married in front of a justice of the peace. Wendy filed a complaint against Dr. Andrews with Human Resources. They hesitated, but in the end, they fired him. The turning point came when another nurse went public with an incident of harassment she experienced when she rejected his advances. She complained to the HR department, and her complaint was ignored. The complaint was buried. When Wendy's complaint became public knowledge, another nurse made her previous complaint public. Neither the HR director nor Dr. Andrews could withstand the ensuing scandal. Wendy sued Dr. Andrews for secretly filming and distributing films. The jury's outrage increased when they learned that Andrews had sent copies to me in an attempt to destroy our relationship. Just before the jury retired to deliberate, Andrews' lawyer offered Wendy $200,000 if she would sign a non-disclosure agreement. Wendy and her lawyer discussed it, and the offer was good, but in the end she decided to take her chances and let the jury decide. It also ensured that Andrews' filming would become public knowledge. Luckily, the jury came up with a decent verdict. Wendy was awarded $130,000. This money came in handy because by the time the trial was over, Wendy was no longer working at the hospital. Her initial fears turned out to be correct. For every person who approved of her desire to stand up to harassment, there were two who were unhappy about the loss of a valuable surgeon and believed that the nurse should just suck it up or quit if she didn't like it. Wendy's lawyer convinced the hospital that it would be better for everyone if they went their separate ways, if the hospital agreed to an annual allowance. The hospital agreed, wrote a check, and said goodbye. When the trial ended, Wendy was 4 months pregnant. 5 months later, we welcomed William Douglas Roman III into the world. And no, he wasn't nicknamed a Trey because there was no Bill in the house. Our son got his grandfather's nickname. 18 months after Bill was born, Wendy gave birth to twins. Leslie and Emma were named after our mothers. Wendy and I decided the family was complete. Now the question was, which of the two of us would be sterilized? We decided to do the fair thing. We tossed a coin. Heads, I do it. Tails, Wendy gets her tubes tied. One throw, Tails. I softened Wendy's defeat in this argument by showing her the tickets. 2 first-class round-trip tickets to St. Martin a month after the law. Twins were scheduled to be weaned. The nannies were already on board. Christy's nanny, Mrs. Hanson, was still helping us with Bill and the twins. Christy was already 13 and a very responsible older sister. Wendy's parents and my parents agreed to fly in for a week each and help Christy, Dad, and Mrs. Hanson. I ensured that 2 weeks were covered. We rented a condo in Orient Beach. Most of the beach was topless, and the end was completely nudist. Although Wendy and I had gone to these famous nude hot springs several times before Bill was born, we had never been to a nude beach. This was a first for us. Wendy knew about topless beaches in the Caribbean, but the nude beach was my surprise for her. When Wendy looked at the tickets, I couldn't help but make fun of her. Probably can't wait to get to those topless beaches, so I can free these babies and show them off to everyone. Wendy's breasts went from size A to B after having 3 children. Still a size or 2 smaller than Jane and Denise. But as I said before, they are perfect, especially on her slender body. GR, you're such a pervert. What should I do with thee? Hold me if you have any sense. Remember when I said before that my luck had changed? It's true, because she really left me. Wendy became my best friend. She told me when I was wrong, supported me when I was right, and stood by me no matter what. We had disagreements, but we never went to bed without discussing them at least a little. Our biggest debate was whether Wendy would work again after the twins started preschool. Mrs. Hanson was still with us, and Wendy missed her career. We finally found a compromise when Wendy found a part-time job 4 days a week, and she was home by 3. We loved to travel, and some of our best times were taking our kids to national parks. We camped all over the West: Zion, Arches, Yellowstone, Crater Lake. You just name it. We were there. Of course, we had to fit into the schedules of all sporting events. It was a hellish nightmare, but a labor of love. My 4 children grew up healthy except for the occasional sports-related fracture or bruise, and have adjusted well to life. We somehow avoided serious problems. We have friends who we consider wonderful, loving parents whose children grew up addicted to substances, homeless, or financially burdened. One of our friends lost his youngest son to an overdose, and at least 3 families we know still have children in their 20s and 30s living with them. Wendy and I also had some anxious moments. Our son Bill tried smoking in high school. We discovered this in time and had a conversation with him. At first, he used the same old arguments. You drink. What's the difference? Our calm response. When was the last time you saw one of us drinking before work and affecting our ability to perform our duties? The second argument, we are adults and do not break the law. I believe that our approach not to overdo it and to find a compromise with Bill produced the right results. His grades rose again, and he graduated from high school and college without any problems. Another intense moment came just 2 years later when Leslie, one of our twins, returned from summer basketball camp and told us that she had fallen in love with one of her coaches, a 23-year-old college student. We learned that he did nothing to encourage her passion, but the next few months were fraught with anxiety for all of us. Fortunately, the problem resolved itself without breaking any laws, without lasting hard feelings, and in a very satisfactory manner. 5 years after the day Leslie told us the news, I walked her down the aisle where she became Mrs. Marcus Price. Their love story deserves a separate story, and their 2 little girls are the same granddaughters who are sitting in the waiting room at the very beginning of this story. Bad news. Now let's return to what happened shortly before the beginning of this story. Wendy and I recently completed a bucket list trip to Italy. We rented a Ducati in Florence and drove for 14 days around Tuscany and the Adriatic coast. We watched Valentino Rossi defeat Jorge Lorenzo at the Motop race in San Marino. Wendy had only seen me race and was amazed to see these professionals reach speeds in excess of 170 miles per hour. It was a wonderful trip, great food and wine, wonderful people, and a wonderful companion. Soon after returning from this amazing trip, I started having headaches, but I chalked them up to sinus problems. Wendy finally talked me into going to an ENT specialist who said it wasn't my sinuses. More tests, more doctors, until a CT scan discovered a tumor in the brain. Unfortunately, due to my high pain tolerance, the tumor had been growing for quite some time. The operation was risky, the full recovery even more so. You already know that I woke up after the operation. Now I have to undergo therapy and keep my fingers crossed. With luck, I will be able to spend another 5 years with Wendy and my family. 10 years later, I sit in the stands and watch Matthew graduate from Gonzaga Prep. I never thought I would see this day. I turned 70 last week, and we decided to celebrate both events by combining them with a family reunion. Christy comes from Colorado Springs, where she works for USA Volleyball. Christy brought Casey, her friend, with her. We're all hoping our eldest has found the one, but we're keeping our mouths shut. It is our own point of view on life that wants this for it. She is happy, living a free, carefree life. She claims that the athletes she trains are her children. Bill and his wife still live in the Spokane area. Emma, her husband, and 2 sons live nearby in Sandpoint. Thank goodness, because Leslie, Marcus, their 2 daughters, and 5-year-old son moved to Miami when Marcus received an offer to become an assistant coach at the Miami Heat. At the very least, it gives Wendy and me an excuse to spend a few weeks in the warm Florida sun every winter. So the whole family was together for the first time since Christmas, 18 months ago. We had to rent a big house through Airbnb for a week because after the last baby left the nest, Wendy and I downsized to a small 2-room cabin north of town in the mountains. 4 children, 3 sons-in-law and daughters-in-law, 6 grandchildren, and 1 friend. What a pleasure it is to have your whole family around. But what a pleasure it is when they leave after a week. I was exhausted. Wendy Douglas, I found Gior's journal in an old moleskin notebook he had in his nightstand. I don't know if he wanted his memoirs to be published, but I decided that he would. Less than 2 months after Matthew graduated from high school, the tumor returned with a vengeance. His doctor said that surgery was not possible and that therapy would not work. It was a question of dealing with the pain. Gior spent a month visiting his children and grandchildren and then returned home to meet the end. That last night, I woke up. I was sitting in a chair reading a book and I heard him stir. He opened his eyes and smiled at me. Oh my God, Wendy, it was a wonderful trip. He closed his eyes and fell asleep again. I kissed his forehead. This was the last hour of Gior's life. Gior could never come to terms with the tragic death of that man, the CEO who suddenly died while walking down the street in Chicago. Gior said he felt lucky to have been given a chance to get his affairs in order and say goodbye to his loved ones. This scoundrel had the audacity to tell me to find another man after he left. He said I was too young to spend my life alone, that I am too beautiful, sexy, generous, and that it is my duty to make another man as happy as I made him. Can you believe it? He got angry when I told him to forget about it. Well, Gior is no longer with us physically, but all I have to do is look at our children and grandchildren to understand that he is still with us all, and how lucky I am that I stopped at the swing 38 years ago. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one. 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 Click to the next one.